somebody inevitably gets angry at me, like, you know, and says something kind of like that, and my answer is pretty visceral and kind of gross, but it always makes them go, oh, okay. And here's the answer. You know, a lot of the folks out on the streets are meth affected. And if you know anything about meth, it dries out your body, your salivary glands and other orifices in your body. It also prolongs sexual activity. That's one of the attractions for why people use it. It's why educated people who know the dangers of meth will still become strung out on meth, because there's a pleasure aspect that should be taken into consideration when we look at the war on drugs and stuff. So sex on meth is going to be long and arduous and dry. It's not very fun. If you're a sex worker and you're being paid to have sex with a guy who's on meth, it's going to be painful, to put it bluntly, and at that point, lubrication becomes a harm reduction tool in and of itself, because you're talking about reducing chafing, you're talking about reducing bloodborne pathogens, and that's why we give that out. That's one of the reasons that we give that out. There's also some other safe sex practices I don't think I need to talk to you this group about.
Do you guys give out needles as well?
We don't give out needles, and we probably we never will give out needles. There's too much of a liability risk, because remember, we're almost entirely volunteer based, and that would entail having to exchange capped or possibly uncapped needles, carrying a sharps container. What we had for a while was Multnomah County had funded a separate outreach worker. Like, I don't know if you've seen those billboards where there's a guy and it says HIV stops with me, and it's usually like somebody's face, like a woman or a man's face, close up. And those are all real people who are diagnosed with HIV who decided to become activists. And one of the guys who was on the billboards used to be able to go out with us, and he wasn't Yellow Brick Road, he had his own bag, but he would piggyback on our teams, and he had a sharps container. And for a while that was working really awesome, because he had cleans in a bag and he had a sharps container, and he could just do like mobile needle exchange. But Multnomah County lost their funding for that within like 6 months, so it was awesome for 6 months, and then it went away. And the problem is the reputation of him being with us never went away, so people constantly ask us for clean needles, because he did it at one time. So we can't give out clean needles. What we do is, if someone comes up to us, and this is a perfect example of harm reduction on outreach, somebody comes up to me and they're pale and they're sweating and they're like, do you guys have clean needles? And it's clear, immediately you're thinking like, all right, the spectrum of harm reduction. Where's this guy at? Abstinence or severe injury or death? He's like already way down, because we already know he's using needles and he's about to shoot up. He needs to get well, he's dope sick or whatever. And it's not as though this guy's going to be like, well, they don't have clean needles, so I guess I won't get high now. You know? But abstinence-based, you know, practitioners sometimes really think that, well, if he doesn't have a clean needle, then he shouldn't use. And people have straight-faced, you know, told me that in all earnestness. They thought that that was what that person should do. So he's going to go use. He's going to use it dirty. He's going to use something he's had around for who knows when. The needle exchange programs are closed. It's late at night, so what do? The harm reduction in us has to like quickly think of, you know, problem solving. How do I non-judgmentally reduce the harm of this person's life right now in the moment? And what we'll do is we'll give them a bleach kit. So bleach kit is not as good as a needle exchange where you're getting a clean needle by any means, but it's going to reduce the harm a little bit. And we make our own bleach kits in the office. They have directions on them. They have everything you need in them to clean a rig. And if you use them correctly, it's about as likely to kill HIV on a needle as a condom is likely to prevent pregnancy. It's pretty good odds. It's like 99.9 or something likely to kill HIV. Hep C is a much harder virus to kill when it's out of the body. So health experts usually say somewhere around 50 to 60% likely to kill Hep C. They're not great odds, but as I always tell people on the street, it's like it's better odds. And wouldn't you rather, you know, increase your odds? And HIV you're likely to kill. So we'll give out bleach kit to that person, and the bleach kit contains the needle exchange info in it, Spanish and English. And it's got pretty much everything: bleach, purified water, rinse caps, a tourniquet to tie off and find the vein so you don't have to do guesswork and make multiple holes. And I know this is kind of graphic, but it's harm reduction, right?
Hey, I think there's like
time for one more question, maybe for Dennis, who's got to head out in a couple minutes.
And I'll stick around till 7. Record store closes at 7. I gotta pick my family up at the record store at 7, so yeah?
Sorry, my voice is totally shot.
Yeah, mine too, don't worry.
I'm wondering how, say things go really well in your outreach and someone gets into shelter, they're in porch light or street light, how do you incorporate harm reduction into trying to create a safe space for folks who might have like conflicting needs in that respect?
Yeah, alright. That's a really good question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it sufficiently in like a little bit of time, but I'll point to some things and you can email me later and I'll fill you in. So ideally, one of the things that overlaps at Janus Youth Programs with harm reduction is another model called positive youth development. And actually they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Positive youth development, in a nutshell, is everything we do with young people, every interaction we have with young people, we should be bolstering their sense of themselves as their own ally, which is probably an easy concept for most people in this room to like wrap your heads around, but it's still considered way radical. It's a way radical approach to working with young people if you look nationwide. It's not at all the historical way that we've even like conceptualized young people. But that's positive youth development, is like you're a perfectly capable ally to your own successful, healthy living. And you can identify what that means to you, because it's going to mean, like, success for me is totally different than probably everyone else in this room. And we let young people identify their own goals and what success and health means to them. Along the way, we're going to try to use harm reduction to maybe educate them and demythologize some of the stuff that's maybe they're not able to make an informed decision about. So in the shelters, once we get them in the door, in theory, what should happen is it's a self-government model, which means you're going to come in and you're expected to agree to follow the agreements in the shelter. And there's a house meeting where some of those can be negotiated, and the theory, again, is that you should have a voice, and you should feel that your voice is going to be heard. There are certain things that will never change in the shelter: no violence, no drugs, no sex. And I think the agreements now is like this 12-page tome that's like, I mean, everything from like bedtime to cell phones and everything. But within that, the message we want to get across is that you have a voice, and you'll be heard, and you'll be listened to, and your opinion will be considered. That's in a perfect world. Nonprofit world's also high turnover, and trying to keep everyone trained to the same level is frankly like a real big problem. But positive youth development, once they're in the shelter, is one of the really important steps toward applying harm reduction. Because what we're doing is we're trying to also encourage trust. We're trying to get young people to feel comfortable being honest with us about their behavior. And that's a different approach than most of the young people we work with have ever experienced before with adults. Because remember, this is like, you know, arguably the most vulnerable population in the community. They're people who come from terribly abusive backgrounds. And so they have really good reasons to be mistrustful of adults. You know, the adults in their lives that should have been unconditional care providers were the opposite of that. You know, at best they were dysfunctional and not able to make ends meet, and that's at best. You know, at worst it was just sexual abuse, physical abuse, disappointment, failure, multiple schools, foster home. So by the time we get them, one of our main jobs is to try to bolster their self-confidence and their trust in us. And when you can get young people to trust you and actually tell you what's going on in their lives, and they feel safe in doing that, that's when you can figure out where they are on the spectrum and how you can jump in, kind of like insert yourself into that kid's life and be like, okay, this is what you're doing now, how can we make it safer, how can we reduce the harm in it? Yeah, and there's a whole ton of like policies and stuff that are meant to keep kids safe. I mean, one harm reduction thing that the shelter has is all the bathroom doors are cut at the bottom so they look like handicap doors, so that if someone drops on the floor, we can theoretically get in there and resuscitate, you know, if someone ODs in our bathroom. You know, it's going to minimize harm, but it's not going to reduce it. And, you know, I think there's been 2 overdose deaths in a decade in the youth shelter, so those are pretty good odds, considering how many of this population are engaged in probably the highest risk behavior. Did that kind of answer it?
Yeah.
There's also Outside In that has the needle exchange site downtown, and it's part of the homeless youth continuum. So harm reduction is being taught in a lot of the places that young people are going. So the other ideal thing would be that they're hearing the same message from different adults at different places to sort of reinforce it.